The year is 1031. Almost 30 years have passed since Brian Boru, leader of the Dalcashian clan and King of Munster, took the crown of High King of Ireland for himself. For more than 600 years, this crown had belonged to the Ineo dynasty, sons of Neil of the Nine Hostages. And for even longer, Irish society has been a disunited patchwork of clans, kingships, and abbeys. However, it was clear that times were changing. From the north, the Vikings that had once pillaged the countryside had been effectively tamed to the point of just being another player in the island. From the east, the fledgling Anglo-Saxon kingdoms had kicked out their Vikings and united under one king under the House of Wessex. Meanwhile, far out in the European continent, feudalism takes root as the landed nobility accumulate power. Back in Ireland, the past 30 years have seen a unification like never before. This was not a peaceful task. Bitter battles against Limerick, Dublin, and Gaelic showed that many places in Ireland were still fiercely independent. In our timeline, Brian's death at the Battle of Clontarf marked the quick end of a unified Ireland under the Dalcasians. In this story, however, thanks to the brilliant leadership of Brian Boru, his liking allies, and a lot of luck, the whole island now bowed to him and his dynasty. But now his body rests. In his last action as king, he took a pilgrimage to Rome and died peacefully while there. His oldest son, Murchad, smoothly takes the reins of power in Munster and is crowned High King of Ireland. However, from the very beginning, it is clear that keeping Ireland together will be a daunting task. Though Brian may have submitted the island, ruling it remains a fight against entropy. Throughout the island, clans vie for more independence, and sooner or later, one will rise to challenge the High King, just as the Dalcatians did some 30 years ago. After Brian's death, the kingship of Ireland succeeds to his oldest son, Murchad. Almost immediately, the king of Gaelic and long enemy of Munster, Flabbertak, revolts to contest the title of High King from him. However, this revolt is quickly dealt with, and Murchad becomes the uncontested High King of Ireland. As Murchad was largely running the show at this point, Brian's death did not spark any big changes in Munster's attitude towards the rest of Ireland. Murchad is known for his military might and ruthlessness, a reputation built off his own resume of military victory against the enemies of Brian Boru. It is important to note that many of these victories were thanks to his Viking allies in Limerick, Cork, and his brother-in-law, Cedric Silkbeard. However, this military focus would lead him to neglect visiting the important monastery at Armagh during his rule, and donating very little to it throughout the length of his reign. As a result, Murchad is painted as a rough and impious man by the church annals. Awaiting the throne, both his son, Torlach, and his brother, Doncad, itched to be next in line for the throne. While typical Tanistry would give the throne to his brother, Torlach appears to have ambitions of his own, though for now, he is satisfied leading the army with Murchad. The first years of Murchad's reign are marked with yearly raids into the territory of other Irish kingdoms, in hopes of enforcing his authority. Thanks to his reputation and his own military skill, these raids go largely unchallenged. In 1035, Canute the Great dies, leaving Sitric with one less ally, and the Irish Sea opened to a new player, Thorfinn, the Earl of Orkney, to wreak havoc in the Irish Sea for the next few years. In 1037, the Viking Ecmerkach overthrows Cedric Silkbeard with the seeming support of Murchad's brother, Doncad. However, Murchad does not immediately respond, as he is raiding Ossory that same year. Cedric is placed back on the throne the next year with the help of Thorfinn. However, Ecmerkach will not give up in claiming the kingship. Ecmerkach flees to the safety of his base in Man, and calls upon Doncad to aid him in reclaiming his kingdom. This irks Murchad, who was in the middle of a small expedition to crush a rebellion in Ulid. Murchad did not like that Doncad was increasingly building a separate network of Vikings, seemingly to oppose him. A confrontation between these two brothers seemed to be brewing. However, Murkad very conveniently dies in the spring of 1039, leaving Doncat to take the throne unopposed. Myth has it that Doncat bribed one of Murkad's Viking mercenaries to poison him, though evidence is scarce. However, this nonetheless enrages Murkad's son, Torlach, who sees himself overshadowed for the second time. Egmercock's overthrow marks the escalation of a wider struggle towards the kingship of Dublin. After Sitric dies in 1038, he is succeeded by Eamar, who will continue his struggle against Egmercock. Doncat will aim to keep his allies on the throne of Dublin. However, a new figure will rise to challenge him. After years of anarchy caused by continuous O'Brien raids, the Uí Kenshelig, king of Leinster, Diarmid, rises to counter the tyranny of the High King. Through his skillful diplomacy and his talent as a military commander, he will become a growing danger for the O'Brien kingship. Doncat's reign is immediately troubled by a rebellion in Ullid and the deposition of his ally Egmercock. Meanwhile, after the repressive reign of Murkad, clans in Connacht and Leinster begin to more openly defy the rule of the High King. In 1039, Doncat takes an expedition to receive Ullid's submission, and on the way, he takes a stop at Armagh. Following Murkad's seeming neglect, Doncat grants large donations towards the church and reaffirms its supremacy over other Irish churches. In exchange, he is affirmed as the king of all Ireland and all foreigners. The following campaign in Ullid is largely unsuccessful, but a truce is signed after it gets devastated by Egmercock's Vikings. In 1042, Diarmid becomes king of Leinster and immediately works on building his own power base against Munster. He finds allies in Wexford, Waterford, and Ullid, and for now sets his eyes on recovering the position of the kingdom of Leinster. Meanwhile, Egmercock faces a major defeat against Thorfinn of Orkney, further reducing his influence. With his authority challenged on all sides, Doncat launches an expedition to Connacht to reassert his authority. Then he sets his eyes on Leinster. However, Doncat is decisively defeated by Diarmid, leaving him with a shattered army, and more importantly, with no sons to inherit the throne after he dies. In 1046, Egmercock is once again restored to the throne of Dublin by the city. Meanwhile, a close ally of Diarmid, Aed, ascends to the throne of Connacht and works on ridding Munster domination. In 1048, Diarmid supports Eamar in reclaiming Dublin, leaving Egmercock back in exile. This time, Eamar clearly being under the influence of Leinster. 2 years later, Doncat marches on Leinster and wins a skirmish against Diarmid, and with this victory, Egmercock returns to Dublin and is hailed king once again. That same year, he also wins a stunning victory against Ullid, finally receiving their submission, and then visits Armagh again to donate to the monastery. In 1052, Diarmid marches into Dublin again, installing his son Murkad into the Dubliner throne. Egmercock retreats to Man again, continuing his alliance with Munster. However, Murkad would rule Dublin for the better part of the next decade. If there is anything the tumultuous 1040 showed to the O'Brien, it's that their once unchallenged rule was about to meet its first existential obstacle. As the High King's legitimacy stemmed from the sheer force he could deliver to the other kings of Ireland, what would happen if one of them were to overshadow them? The rise of Diarmid in Leinster posed this exact question, as his military skill and diplomacy will lead to a drastic decrease in the influence of Munster across Ireland. Doncat's later reign is largely him attempting to reel in as much influence as he can, while clearly being outclassed by Diarmid's ability. Contributing to his scheming reputation, Doncat will find ways to undermine him, though ultimately, his demise will come from somewhere else. Already in 1053, Doncat's situation is tenuous. With this in mind, he launches a severe raid into the lands of Connacht in a direct attack to Diarmid's new power base. Though he manages to ravage the countryside, he is badly defeated and retreats. Nonetheless, Diarmid continues to systematically raid Munster's territory to the severe detriment of Doncat. In 1054, the city of Cork was completely burned down, leaving Doncat with one less ally in the field. The next year, the two kings meet in pitched battle. This time, Doncat squeezes out a Pyrrhic victory, leaving his kingdom safe from raiding that year. However, Doncat does realize that he may not be able to fully defeat Diarmid in battle, and so he reduces the direct engagements he has with him, instead spending efforts to contain his influence elsewhere. However, In 1061, Diarmid meets Doncat in battle again with his allies of Ossory, Dublin, and Waterford, and Doncat is dealt a decisive defeat, with a lot of his clan and Viking allies massacred. With this victory, most of Munster's de facto authority over Ireland begins to vanish. In that same year, Diarmid marches to Limerick and burns the city to the ground. Suddenly, in 1062, Doncat is deposed by Turlough. After years of living in the shadow, he sees the opportunity to finally claim kingship for himself, and with the aid of Diarmid, he forces Doncat to yield the crown of Ireland to him, while cementing an alliance with the Leinster king. Without any kin to speak of, Doncat takes a pilgrimage to Rome with his old ally Ecmercach, where they both die. The next 2 decades in Irish history are less well recorded. The fall of Doncat reduced the power of the High King to no better than the old kings of Tara. Though Brian's legacy still kept other kings from seeking the crown, even this possibility remained open with the power Diarmid handled. Turlough MacMurchada rises to a kingdom in crisis. His alliance with Diarmid effectively surrendered what remaining authority Munster had across the island, and the terrible defeat at Ossory and the sack of Limerick left his armies in ruin. Worst of all, the rotten way he rose to the throne made an enemy of his cousin, also named Turlough, the son of Taig and grandson of Brian Boru. He would consistently challenge MacMurchada's right to rule, and the family rivalry will carry on to their sons Kennetig and Muirchertach. Turlough MacMurchada's first order of action was to crown himself High King in Armagh. This doesn't change the situation on the floor though, as his authority is still overshadowed by that of Diarmid. Yet, it is unclear why Diarmid didn't just take the title of High King for himself. It is likely he thought his alliance with Turlough was enough for his power. Regardless, the next year, Turlough MacMurchada is quickly betrayed by his men after a battle with Turlough MacTaig. MacTaig's rebellion succeeded primarily thanks to his Norse allies, many of which were previously Ecmercach's men. Turlough MacMurchada runs away to Leinster. However, MacTaig has little time to consolidate his power, as in 1065, MacMurchada rallies an army with Diarmid to take back his throne. By pure luck, he manages to repel MacMurchada's initial assault near Ossory. Out in England, the Norman Duke William II successfully takes the English throne from Harold Godwinson. The sons of Harold Godwinson escape to Ireland and land in the court of Diarmid and MacMurchada. Both offer their sons resources against William in exchange for aid in MacMurchada's effort to retake his throne. The following year, MacTaig is driven out of Munster and MacMurchada marches again into Cashel, where MacTaig escapes to Man with his Viking allies. Little is recorded of MacMurchada's second rule. He sponsors some raids into England to return the favour of the Godwinsons in 1068. However, he is soon overthrown after losing a battle to MacTaig in Cashel. He once again escapes to Leinster. In 1070, he returns to Munster with a large expeditionary force. MacTaig attempts to confront him, but suddenly dies. His son, Muirchertach, quickly attempts to consolidate himself after his father's sudden death. However, he is defeated and flees to the Isles, and later England. In the first year of Turlough MacMurchada's third rule, Murchad MacDiarmid, King of Dublin, dies. Power transfers over to Diarmid, who takes direct control of the city. For now, MacMurchada seems content with ruling Munster and doesn't launch any expeditions towards the other kingdoms. The decade of chaos that succeeded Doncat's death significantly reduced the authority of the High King across the entire island. In 1072, Diarmid, King of Leinster, finally dies, leaving the throne of Leinster to his relative Domhnall. With the threat of Diarmid over, MacMurchada takes the chance to restore his own authority and reassert his own position as High King of Ireland. This is the best time to do so, as in Leinster, Domhnall must fight against a rival claimant, Doncat. For the next years, both men would challenge each other for the Leinster kingship, deteriorating the influence Leinster had in the process. Meanwhile, in Dublin, Godfred MacRagnall, a close friend of Ecmercach and relative of the O'Brien dynasty, retakes the throne of Dublin from a weakened Leinster. However, it is clear that this takeover was for another purpose, as with him returns Muirchertach, who was deposed 4 years ago and still claimed the throne of Munster. Seemingly, some sort of arrangement was held between the two men, where Godfred would keep Dublin in exchange for lending aid to Muirchertach in retaking the throne. Muirchertach styles himself as the real High King of Ireland, to the anger of MacMurchada. The next year, MacMurchada launches an expedition to Leinster to support Domhnall in his ongoing quarrel. It is extremely evident that this is just to keep Leinster divided. Back in Dublin, the reigning bishop of the city, Donnan, is succeeded by Gila Patrick. This is important, as Gila signaled the arrival of a movement that would reshape Irish society in the coming years. Across the European continent, clergy and monks have taken steps to reform the church and all its structure. Monastic rules became more strict, while the structure of the church evolved to be more hierarchical and independent from the whims of other kingdoms. The Gregorian Reform, as it is known in our timeline, will reshape the way Christianity is practiced in Ireland within the next years. However, before any confrontation could occur between Muirchertach and MacMurchada, MacMurchada dies and is succeeded by his son, Kenneteague. The next year, Godfrid, King of Dublin, is killed in an expedition to England. Here, Muirchertach takes full control of Dublin, where he quickly manages to extend his influence across Leinster and the cities of Wexford and Waterford. That same year, Donnchad is made King of Leinster. Muirchertach then marches to Munster, where he defeats Kenneteague in battle and takes the kingship of Munster to himself. Kenneteague flees to Gaelic. With this victory, the rapid succession of kings that unraveled Munster's authority will end. But now, will the O'Brien be able to put the pieces back together? The Munster Muirchertach inherits is not the Munster of Brian Boru. Decades of internal war have destabilized the authority of the O'Brien, and only through sheer luck does no one take the crown from them. However, the long-term trends in Ireland will ultimately favour them. Though Limerick and Cork have been thoroughly pillaged, they nonetheless remain important cities for trade and reliable recruitment grounds for all Munster monarchs. Norsemen will continue to be an important player in Irish politics, however, never to the power that they once held during the 9th and 10th centuries. Over time, Dublin and Limerick will rise to be the primary cities of Ireland. However, the most important development will come from outside of the island. Across Europe, the Gregorian Reform movement seeks to create a more moral clergy, and one that is also more structured and independent from the whims of kings and nobles. For centuries, Christianity in Ireland worked very differently. Instead of bishops, monasteries and abbots were seen as the heads of faith. Furthermore, these monasteries were typically hereditary and made up of mostly laity. As a result, the following centuries saw figures like Gaelic of Armagh rise to enact reforms across Ireland. Meanwhile, the papacy in Rome will begin to play a larger role within the Irish church affairs. Having grown up in persistent war and instability, Muirchertach will go to great lengths to ensure his position as High King of Ireland. In this reform movement, he will see the opportunity to reshape the kingship to more than a simple title. Muirchertach's time in England showed to him the power of an organized church in giving legitimacy to monarchs like William the Conqueror. As High King of Ireland, Muirchertach will gladly welcome the reformation of the Irish Church, hoping his patronage will cement him as the legitimate King of Ireland, not just to Irishmen, but to European monarchs beyond the Irish Sea.